Cool. Yeah. So I'm Michael. This is Andy. We started a company last August called Active Theory, and we've been working at ad agencies and even smaller creative shops. And we just branched out on our own to kind of do our own thing. We've learned like a lot of really awesome lessons, and we just kind of want to briefly share them. We've come up with, I think, a unique development pattern to create some interesting things in the browser, really kind of push it and go kind of beyond what you've normally seen with JavaScript, almost, dare I say, Flash-like stuff, but stuff that's accessible across multiple devices, iPads, and getting like really smooth, animated things all over the place. So we'll just start by going through our slides. Let's see. Yeah. There we go. Cool. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the MVC pattern. That's just pretty much what we use. We've created an internal framework called Hydra that it uses the MVC pattern. It allows us to do some pretty powerful things.
We use views basically as divs. We use classes for views, and we use IDs for controllers. So controllers, I mean, most of you guys probably know what MVC is. So we use controllers to create, style these divs, and then we animate them using controllers using like listeners. So they listen for events and then bubble through their children.
Yeah, some of the projects, this was, we did a project called Clouds Over Cuba, which was an interactive documentary about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And these were all the classes for that project. And it was just, that project, we worked 12 hours a day nonstop for the entire project, maybe like a month or so, yeah. 2 months.
So yeah, there's no HTML elements in this. It's just all, it's 150 JavaScript classes, which then compile down into one, as you can see.
Yeah, this is the end. This is basically what lives on the server right now.
So if you view source on Clouds Over Cuba, this is what you see.
Yeah.
So there's just data. That data.js file is just exported from the CMS. And then that hooks into the minified JavaScript file, jfk.min. And then that's it. That's the entire code of the site in those two JavaScript files. The CSS has hardly anything
basically.
on it. Yeah, basically it's just instantiating fonts, and it has global rules like so body star, position absolute, because we just absolute everything, which I'm sure the W3C hates, but we found it's the best way to animate things and style them.
Yeah, so kind of to make it perfectly clear, the whole approach with our framework is to not write any markup at all. And that gets a lot of people very angry. We actually saw the other day someone had posted a link to our site on Reddit, and it had started this like big, huge thing about why you shouldn't do that, which was weird. But it was...
But I mean, it's so good in terms of debugging. So like what happens when we're coding is that we get an error, and then it tells us exactly where the class it is.
Yeah.
And then we can just go into that file. We're creating the div, we're styling it, we're animating it all in one file. And so, I mean, you don't have to go through and find in a CSS file 3,000 lines down where it is. You don't have to find it in an HTML file. So we found that's the best way for debugging, and it makes us write really quick code.
Yeah. The most important thing for us in advertising is, and we're just going to get to the examples. We're going to blast through this. Yeah. The most important thing is just being able to move quickly. We have to run on multiple devices, so we need the MVC code structure, and we basically allow the code to branch off if it's if it knows that if it's a phone and is it WebGL capable, and we basically not only sniff for user agents, but we sniff for the best combination is to sniff for both user agents and for capabilities. So coding past markup, basically what we just covered. So this is basically a simple thing, basically creating a square that's 100 pixels wide and tall and has a background image. The top one is how you do it with jQuery. In our framework, we've simplified it a bit so we can use shortcuts.
Yeah, it's basically just shortcuts, just to make our lives easier. So in ours below, like .size, we use that sets the background size as well. So you could do, in BG, you just do a simple like if statement, so you can go if retina, then serve up the retina image, if not, serve up the non-retina, and then it determines it so it can resize it based on what sort of device you're using.
Yep, and just one quick thing to point out, in our framework, there's no selecting since there's no HTML, so what looks like a jQuery selector here is actually creating a div element called test. Quickly, how we deal with content management, and these are just kind of the questions. This is what people tend to argue about, is like, how do you deal with content and how do you deal with SEO? So content management, we have a simple CMS that we built. Bottom line is, it just outputs a chunk of JSON, and we parse it into our model, and it gets used throughout the app. Basically,
yeah. It's usually static. It's usually static data.
Yeah.
Depending on what it is, we just launched a Venables Bell website, which makes API calls constantly throughout the site. But usually it's just done using a CMS that we built in-house, which is then exported as a JavaScript file like you saw in the source.
Yeah, keep in mind, the type of work that we do is short-lived ad campaigns, stuff that will either has no data, for one project we'll show you, or has a limited amount of data that goes to serve the purpose of demonstrating features of a video game, stuff that you're just going to put in there. This approach may not work for huge sites where you're dealing with tons of data that things are constantly changing.
Which you need 10 developers to work on, so it's not.
The last thing is SEO, and this part is kind of the big topic that people don't really agree with, but since there's no markup, people assume there's no SEO, but it's not necessarily true. You can use the push state API to change the URLs. So if someone or a crawler was to hit that URL, you just need your backend to serve up any markup you want, really. You obviously should make it representative of your content. It serves up that markup, and you've got a perfectly crawlable SEO site. So that's kind of the general gist of what we do and how we do it. Now we'll kind of get into the cool part of what it actually is and the things we're able to do. So
we kind of wanted to approach this section as kind of like an open forum. So if you guys have a question while we're talking, going through these sites, just shout it out or ask, or put your hand up. I'm not too sure how you want to use a microphone. Yeah.
jQuery plugin?
It started out as one, and then we found that jQuery was really slow. Sorry?
Repeat the question, then answer it.
Yeah, OK. So the question was, is Hydra a jQuery plugin? And it started out as a jQuery plugin. But we found that jQuery was pretty slow, and eventually we basically wrote jQuery out of it completely. So it has things that are very similar to jQuery. The syntax, as you may have noticed a minute ago, is very similar, but it does not use jQuery at all.
It wasn't too bad on desktop, but mobile was where the performance was. So we needed tight memory management, because as you know, phones don't have much RAM available to the browser, so we had to really optimize it in order to get a lot of tweens happening at once.
And basically what we mean by that. This is a site that we worked on with, it's an agency called Tool of North America. They hired us to kind of work as part of their team and be their development partner. So for pretty much all the projects, we did all the development, and we had input on the design and the UX, but we did all the code front to back for all these projects. So basically, the premise of this application is it's for a TV show that is on the Sundance Channel, and basically the main character goes to jail for 20 years and gets out. So the idea here was it's a social network of what it's going to look like in 20 years. So the concept here was to build this 3D kind of platform to kind of navigate through your content. Now, excuse the frame rate. I think it's the screen recording that's kind of chugging my computer a little bit. But basically, imagine if your Facebook timeline was in a 3D plane. So there were definitely some technical challenges to make this happen. The terrain is WebGL, and that was coded by Bartek at Tool using his J3D engine. It actually doesn't use 3JS in this case. But it actually matches up with the 3D planes on top. So they're actually two completely separate things. The terrain is moving as these elements are moving, and these are all CSS 3D. They're rotated with perspective, so as you scroll through, they'll kind of tilt and move out of the way, and then you can click them, open them up, reel the content. It has kind of comments from your friends, and that's basically that. So we've got your friends section. It kind of shows that only a few people have stayed with you, and most others have defriended you. What we've got basically working here is these are div elements on top of a canvas, and the canvas is drawing the lines underneath. Again, just some CSS 3D. Messages, pretty much the same thing. So, basically to achieve this, performance is extremely crucial. And so with our framework, we've made sure that we have total control over all the memory management, over from when you create an object to when it's destroyed. There's pretty much no way that memory can leak if you just following some simple rules. You want to do Venables?
Yeah, sure. So this was a site that we just launched for Venables Bell. So this is a grid-based website which pulls data in from their CMS. So they did the CMS on this. But the way it handles is we make a call to their API. We get a feedback of data, which is usually 16 modules or something, or 12, depending on whether it's mobile or desktop. But as you scroll down, it kind of lazy loads the modules. One big technical hurdle we had to face with this is that they wanted the entire site to scale down. So not that it's responsive in terms of media queries, that the entire site scaled to their viewport because they have a lot of producers and stuff on 11-inch MacBook Airs. So I think that was a massive technical hurdle because this isn't just scaling the modules, it's actually looping through every module, scaling the canvas, the text, its positioning, and its padding. And it does the same for mobile orientation changes as well. One thing that we have noticed though is on this site, once you start adding a lot of canvases to a page, it starts to lag. So after about 6 pages or so, we're starting to implement a system where it deletes the canvases and reattaches them to the DOM. So this is one of the sites where we've kind of found the limitations of rendering in a browser and how it can affect the performance, especially as you start scrolling.
So basically with this site, this site has an entirely, almost separate mobile component, but it follows the same structure with our framework that it's not a separate code base. It actually shares many of the same components, but almost looks entirely different. It looks a bit like a mobile app. If you want to check it out, it's venablesbell.com. So, I mean, we can continue on and show some more examples, but kind of hoping to kind of field any questions, anything that you've seen that has kind of popped, even any sort of questions. Would love to kind of show some code, but I don't really want to dive too much into the code out of context because it's just doesn't really work. Yeah.
Yeah, if you wanted us to speak about a certain section, like for instance, all of these canvases are multiplying an image using multi-threading in the browser, which we've then
yeah, basically it creates it opens a few threads when the site loads, and then as the images kind of load in from the server, it basically distributes those across the threads, so it can run all this image processing without hanging the main UI, which is actually kind of nice. Let's just jump into Clouds over Cuba. So Clouds over Cuba is an interactive documentary about the Cuban Missile Crisis. This one was probably the biggest project I've ever worked on. It was over 200 or so classes. Yeah. It had to work on mobile. on mobile, it actually syncs your desktop experience, and it sends you little notifications as you are watching. So as you're watching the documentary, it's going to tell you that some content is available, content being photos and videos and audio recordings from this era. For the server for that, we actually use Node.js and basically just use Socket.io with a bit of custom logic applied. And once you synced, the desktop site would just send a notification to the server that a piece of content had been unlocked, and that would just forward it directly to the paired phone. So basically, we like to focus a lot on our animation and the detail in the animation.
Yeah, so I think one of the big hurdles with this site was that everything needed to be custom. So a lot of things which you'd usually use a plugin for, we kind of had to code from scratch. So all the video players on mobile and iPad, we kind of had to start. We kind of had to start from scratch, and just because of the way that I guess the concept was just we needed to make sure that everything was in sync and things were unlocking and everything talked back to the site so that you knew, because it keeps track of where your progress is, so you can come back to the site and everything's kind of where it was. That was one of the main aspects of what they wanted in the site, was that you didn't have to start again as you came back.
Well, another part that was pretty a unique challenge is this timeline down the bottom. It actually has to, no matter what your screen size is, that timeline needs to adjust. And not only does it need to adjust, but it needs to stay synced with the video. So as you kind of go through the video and you notice the different tabs for different progress points, if you were to drag to this part, it's going to immediately jump to Saturday, October 27th, 1962. And it's going to continue to do that for basically every chapter.
Yeah, the timeline also isn't linear according to the video. So one of the problems was that this video, so the time it takes from October 26th to October 22nd is different. So we had to slow down the video according to that bit, and when it got to the October 27th, had to start going faster again in order to match as they're talking in the video. So I think that's one of the aspects that isn't really, I guess it's pretty neat.
Yeah, Chevy Volt. This one might be a bit tough because the frame rate issue with the recorder. So this one was kind of a fun project. It was pretty much entirely a motion graphics study. There really was no data here. Besides, we were pulling in an XML feed from OnStar that basically gave us some values about metrics about miles driven on electric and gallons of fuel saved. So each section, this is basically showing there's been 143.3 million miles driven. So this was, all these animations they're completely hand-coded. We're not using any IDE or any sort of animation software. Everything is being created as a div element appended to the page and then animated.
How do you get started with
So,
that process? I mean, do you storyboard it? What do you...
For this particular process,
Again, repeat the question.
oh, sorry. The question was, how did this process start? Was there storyboarding? No, for this particular process, we worked with a motion graphics studio called Gentleman Scholar, and they provided all of the designs, and they actually comped up the motion, so we just needed to match it.
So did you guys have any special custom kind of building tools to keep timelines in track and everything like that as you're doing the animation?
Not really.
So,
I mean, it's
hang on,
just
the question. So the question was, were there any timelines or tools to keep the animation in sync?
No, it was just kind of, we have pretty good animation skills. We just kind of watched the video and then just matched things up as it came.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, it was good.
No, it actually was fun. It really was. Yeah, I mean, just little I mean, it's crazy how much time you'll sink into this. just little things, just how the car moves and how it eases in perfectly, and then how that stops, but the car kind of glides to a stop. And how long I spent on these pizza slices was insane.
You guys aren't using a sprite?
The question was, are we using a sprite? There's a few sprites. The birds are sprites. There's, oh, we got to, let's see. Sasquatch is a sprite.
Yeah.
We'll get to Sasquatch. That was our favorite. He was a bit of a last-minute addition. Yeah, he'll pop out of this tree in a second. So that was a very important client addition.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're all familiar with them. That was ours from this project.
Had to be in there.
Yeah, so a bit of Canvas, I mean, we like to add some interaction to everything we do, whether it's small, subtle things. It's kind of tough having frame rate issues, but when it's nice and smooth and there's a bit of interaction and the animation is really polished, and it just brings a whole new dimension, and that's what we really get excited about, is we really love to work on things and create really interesting interfaces.
Sorry, just one last one. Did you have to kind of like responsibly scale down the animation for lower power devices too, or was everything able to kind of keep up?
So the question was, did we have to basically scale the animations back for performance? In this case, no, because, we did have to support older versions of Internet Explorer, and for those we basically just used static screens. Yep. But beyond that, the new modern browsers really had no issues with this. But in the framework, we do have the ability to check frame rates at different times. And one thing, it's like a simple method called a threshold, and you just say, hey, over the next 2 seconds, if the frame rate drops below this, let me know. And in that case, we would kind of scale some things back and turn off some animations. So I guess the last thing we'll just show is sneak peek of our new site. Hopefully it pulled down from Git. Yeah, it looks like it did. So we're working, turn on the web browser, the server.
Sure, it's not zero site.
No, my computer crashed before. So we haven't launched this yet, still a few weeks away, but basically just outlining the sites we just showed, because that's the work we've done in the last 6 months. But we went with this kind of cube transition for the entire concept of the site, and kind of excited by that. That brought some unique challenges, specifically on iPad and getting this to work well. Same thing for mobile. When you're applying 3D transitions, it's uniquely challenging because it's offloading things to the graphics card, and it's this magic trick. Like doing any graphic programming, it's all tricks. It's basically, you need to know the right time to send something to the graphics card and when to take it back off. And if you send too many things to the graphics card, then it's just going to get really slow. But yeah, so that's pretty much. That's everything we have, but I mean, we'd love to kind of answer some more questions if there's anything.
Yeah, show you guys some code if you can.
Yeah.
So device detection is a really complicated problem, and there are huge libraries like REPL that try to do that. So I was actually interested in hearing how you guys solve that problem.
So the question was device detection and how we solve it. It's basically a two-step process. It's sniffing the user agent, and it's also detecting capabilities. So as far as user agent goes, I mean, it's basic. I mean, it's pretty basic. You'll know if it's Internet Explorer. We can get what operating system you're working on. Typically, what we'll do is I'll create a static class that will be called the device class for whatever the project is. And in there is where I'll set a big list of features. So in the case of our site, one is a feature called, can it run a cube? Can it do the cube transition? And then I'll apply some rules. So I know if it's a mobile device. So I say if it's a mobile device, yeah, mobile devices can do the cube. Is it an old version of Internet Explorer? That can't do the cube. And you basically just create a list of rules of what the site can, what devices can run different things on the site. And as the site goes through, you kind of have to code some fallbacks. So in this case, if it's not a CSS 3D enabled browser like IE9, it's not going to run the cube. It's just going to do a simple swipe transition.
Yeah, what do you have to serve
So the question was about SEO. So we haven't set it up yet on our site, but in the case of Venables, I can actually show you. Yeah. So if we were to like go into a work piece, for example, there was no refresh from the server there. It was just getting new data from the server, creating new views. But if I was to refresh on this page, load directly into the page and view the source, it's actually serving up markup that is just specifically meant for SEO. So it's actually kind of nice because you can abstract your markup out. So you're only coding markup for basically like to be perfectly semantic, and you don't have to worry about styling it and creating extra divs for style.
What do you use to generate that backend?
Question was how to generate that and what to generate that. In this case, I believe they handled all the backend. They used Expression Engine, but then they found Expression Engine to be a bit too slow. So as far as like serving up data in real time, so they coded a code igniter system that just tapped into the database and spit out the data, just as basically as like middleware API.
So are you just drawing over the hierarchy index of the page and everything else, or how are you like masking all that?
Right. So it was how are we getting rid of this markup basically in the page, and that's just it goes inside. Yeah, there's a div here called SEO content. That's set in the CSS to be like top -9999 or something, and then we immediately destroy that as soon as the JavaScript loads. Yeah.
On that same note, there's SEO penalties for having content that's not visible. Does that not come into play here, or how does that work?
The question was about SEO penalties for the content not being visible. In this case, we're letting them handle that, so I'm not too sure. But like I said, most of the work that we do is campaign work. So typically, there isn't a bunch of pages associated. Like Clouds Over Cuba, there's really only that one page associated with it. And the only thing they really care about is does it share on Facebook and have a little icon. So we don't spend too much time on the SEO side. But if the project was to come up, and this is one where we're kind of learning as we go, there are tricks that you can do by doing this and basically figuring out what will it allow, what won't it allow. But for this particular site, they're an ad agency, and they have good SEO just based on the number of links to them from media outlets and things like that. So it's a challenge with everything. You just kind of have to test it out as you move along. So that's it. That'll be it then.